So you're ready to transform. I have 10 minutes. Let's talk about it. The first step that is required, that I hold as a requirement for all transformation, is a belief in God. Now, before you click away, let's stay with this for a second. Because when I say God, I am not talking about religion, and I am not talking about a man created God. What I'm talking about is the ever present, omnipresent source of love that runs this whole thing, this whole operation on planet Earth. And why is that the first step for transformation? A belief in God, or a power that is in charge of the whole thing and keeps us all afloat, is safety. Safety is the thing that most of us, many of us, actually didn't receive when we were younger. Now, God is not human. And that's a really important understanding, because I think we reference and relate to a higher power as if it's human like we are, and it's not. So I want to make sure that that distinction is clear, because if you're listening to this YouTube video right now, you probably arrived here through a human. And if you didn't, message me, because I would love to figure out how you got here. But if you had human parents, and whether or not those parents were biological or via adoption or whatever that story was, the chances are 100% that those humans that raised you were not perfect. And what I mean by not perfect is they had their own journeys that they were on. They, just like you, just like me, were learning about trust. They were learning about attachment. They were learning how to build connections. They were healing some of the trauma that they may have experienced in their lifetime, and not just healing it. Maybe they weren't even aware of it. Maybe they weren't on a healing path. Maybe they were totally oblivious to the idea of healing. But you listening to this video, some desire to heal, some desire to transform, right? To change the way in which you show up and exist here in this lifetime. And I really commend you for that, because it's a beautiful undertaking, and it is a journey of undoing and redoing. And the reason God is at the center of that is because we live in such an uncertain world. And that uncertainty, as you become more aware of yourself, of your thoughts, of your feelings, of your body, of the interactions and interplays that are happening all the time around us between other humans, as you become aware of that, you will also become more aware of how incredible it is that we even exist, right? How incredible it is that we actually survive every single day, and not just survive, but we have the capacity to thrive. And as you become more aware of it, you become more aware of the uncertainty that is always present, right? You become aware of what's in your control and what is not in your control. And what's in your control is so much smaller than the amount of things that are not in your control. And that, in a moment, can create an array of feelings, including feelings of powerlessness, including feelings of maybe hopelessness, maybe fear, maybe like anxiety, right? Because how do we navigate that, right? When we have so little to be powerful with, that's right, to show up with, and then we have to lean so hard into faith and into trust and into hope, right? And that's where God comes in for me, and that's where God comes in for so many of the people that I've worked with over my lifetime, because, there are no guarantees, right? I have no guarantees. You have no guarantees. The only thing that's like guaranteed is that I have lived a life up until this point. And the only reason I have that guarantee is because it is already done, and the same can be said for your future. And your intellect might not want to grasp this, but I ask you to stay with me, because your future is already done too. However, we aren't fully aware of it, and we're still in the making of it and the experiencing of it. And so what we do is we lean into God. We lean into this trust, right? We lean into this presence that we can deeply believe has our best interest at heart always. And it requires a shifting of God as a human entity into God as this thing, this presence that is not human. And it's not human because it is infallible. And I think what gets in the way sometimes is we think that God is the presence that's supposed to give us what we want. And God is a presence that's supposed to get us what we want in terms of circumstance, in terms of form, right? In terms of physical manifestations, right? Like, God, I want some AirPods. Like, send me some AirPods. And then if I get the AirPods, then I'll know that God exists, right? And that treats God like a transactional God, and God is not a transactional God. God is working to create the emotional and vibrational circumstances that will help you to become the person that can receive AirPods when they show up, and that's the thing that is really important, because when you decide that you're going to transform, you are going to have many moments where you're in this in-between space where you've let go of so many things, right, that can't come with you on the next leg of the journey. And also this other stuff hasn't shown up yet. And in order to receive that other stuff, you've got to hold a space internally that maybe you've never held before, that maybe you've never curated before, that maybe you've never felt before. And our systems as humans, we don't really like uncertainty, right? We're not really wired for being in an unknown void, that actually terrifies us a lot. And it's actually like the through line in scary movies, right? Is you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what's popping up in the woods. You don't, right? And that's that unknown, right? Creates that fear along with the music that they put and along with the scene setting, right? And you've got to ask yourself, if the unknown represents fear for me, then how can I go somewhere I've never been before? How can I say I want to create something I've never experienced before if I have never known it? And the unknown represents fear for me. And so what the bringing in of this concept of God does is it says the unknown represents possibility. The unknown represents hope, and the unknown asks for me to turn up the volume on my faith, to look deeper, right, at where I attach myself to worldly circumstances, when all of this worldly stuff is so temporary, right? It could be lost in a moment. And we've had such a year of that, of like, these moments that we've seen, on social media or in the media where everything gets lost. And there's this deep grief, and rightfully so. And also, like, in that grief, there gets to be this hope. And where do you source that hope? How do you source that hope when you've lost everything, or when it feels like your life has been like leveled, you know what I mean? And everything feels so unfamiliar. And this is really something that definitely happens when it comes to transformation, is that if I'm saying I want to be this version of me that not only have I never been in this lifetime, but nobody in my family has ever been either. I don't know anybody in my lineage who has gone this direction, who has been inspired internally by this idea, by this lifestyle, by this service, by this impact. And so that's when we root ourselves, we anchor ourselves to God, because God is the thing that we go, I know that there is something that is bigger than me, that is moving in my favor. And when I say in my favor, it doesn't mean that it's working to give me everything that I want. It's working to help me to become the woman to receive and make decisions to create the space to live into that in my world. And that's the thing that is it's such a game changer. It's such an unfair advantage to be anchored in that belief, and to be able to say that I am going to be vulnerable enough to bring my desires through without attachment to what it looks like, without attachment to if it works or not, right? If it works the way I want it to, because I will be the first to tell you that, I have so many times in the course of my life, really been attached to an outcome, and so attached that I blocked the actual outcome and for years. And then once I let go of that attachment, what showed up was actually better than what I had imagined originally. It was so good that I couldn't have even written it down in my journal to ask for it, because that level of goodness didn't exist in my human brain based on my history, based on my past, based on what I knew of the world, and based on what I believed the capacity of God was, right? So I offer this to you today to consider that, the first step of transformation is not rearranging your calendar per se. It's not, taking an action. The first step of transformation is deciding that you're going to anchor yourself into a safety that maybe has never been present in your life, because maybe you couldn't anchor into safety because your parents weren't present, or your parents were present and they loved you and they also were so human. They were so human. How could they give you the perfect safety? Right? So as you consider your transformation, ask yourself, am I in resistance to this idea that there is a force that is working in my favor? And if so, what could I begin to believe or begin to unravel that would help me to be more available to that, because it is available for you? And it will be the thing that amplifies and expands and quickens your journey of transformation. I love you so much. I'll talk to you soon.